The private jet terminal at Teterboro Airport was quiet that Thursday afternoon. Too quiet, almost like the world had paused just long enough for someone important to catch their breath. Sunlight slanted through the tall glass windows, casting long golden rectangles across the polished concrete floor. A few luxury sedans idled near the entrance, their drivers scrolling on phones or dozing off in the shade. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather, coffee, and that crisp, sterile scent that always lingers in places built for people who never have to wait in lines. He walked in alone. No entourage. No assistant rushing ahead with a tablet. No bodyguard scanning the room like a hawk. Just a man in his late 30s wearing a black hoodie that had seen better days, faded jeans, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. Clean, but not new. His hair was trimmed short, his face calm, eyes scanning the space with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to announce his presence. He carried a small duffel bag slung over one shoulder, the kind you'd use for a weekend trip or a gym session. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed billionaire. But that's exactly what he was. Not the kind you see on magazine covers or late-night talk shows. He wasn't into the spotlight. He'd built his company from a garage in Oakland, coding through sleepless nights while eating instant noodles and dreaming of something bigger. Now his artificial intelligence platform powered everything from hospital diagnostics to city traffic systems across 3 continents. His net worth? Somewhere north of $3 billion. But you wouldn't know it by looking at him. And that was the point. He liked it that way. When he traveled, especially on private flights, he preferred to blend in. No suits, no watches worth more than a car, no unnecessary attention. He believed that comfort mattered more than image and that real power didn't need to announce itself. Today's flight was supposed to be simple. Teterboro to Van Nuys, California. A quick hop across the country for a board meeting with investors who'd been pushing for an IPO. He'd wrapped up a last-minute call with his CTO just minutes before leaving his Manhattan apartment, which is why he was running a little behind. Not late, just not early. But in the world of private aviation, even 2 minutes could feel like an eternity if things went sideways. As he approached the gate area, though gate wasn't really the right word here, there were no TSA lines, no boarding passes, just a discreet door leading straight to the tarmac. He nodded at the ground handler standing near the entrance. The man in a crisp navy uniform with a company patch on his sleeve gave a polite smile but didn't seem to recognize him. That wasn't unusual. Charter crews rotated often, especially with smaller operators who serviced multiple clients. Still, the man didn't stop him, didn't ask for ID. He just held the door open with a quiet, "After you, sir," and let him pass. Outside, the tarmac shimmered in the afternoon heat. Jet engines hummed softly in the distance. A Gulfstream G650 sat parked near the far end of the ramp, its silver fuselage gleaming under the sun. That was his plane. He'd chartered it through a trusted broker, the same one he'd used for years. The tail number matched the one in his itinerary. Everything looked normal. He walked toward it with easy strides, the duffel bag bouncing lightly against his hip. He could already picture the cabin. Plush cream seats, a stocked minibar with his favorite sparkling water, maybe a fresh fruit platter. He wasn't looking forward to the meeting, but he was glad to be off the ground. Flying always gave him space to think, to reset. Up there, above the noise, everything felt clearer. But as he reached the bottom of the air stair, the small set of steps leading up into the jet, a figure stepped into his path. She was young, maybe mid-20s, dressed in the standard uniform of the charter company. A fitted navy blazer, white blouse, pencil skirt, and sensible heels. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her makeup perfect. She held a clipboard in one hand and a polite but firm expression on her face. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice pleasant but edged with authority. "This is a private charter flight. Are you on the passenger manifest?" He stopped, not out of confusion but out of mild surprise. He'd never been asked this before, not like this, not standing right at the door of his own plane. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm the one who booked it." She blinked, then glanced down at her clipboard, scanning the list. Her brow furrowed slightly. The charter was booked under a corporate account. The primary passenger listed is, well, someone else. He didn't flinch. "That's me. I travel under my company name for privacy." She looked up at him again, her eyes flicking over his hoodie, his jeans, his sneakers. There was no malice in her gaze, just uncertainty, maybe even a hint of concern. like she was trying to protect the flight from an intruder, not realizing the intruder might actually be the owner. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her tone softening just a fraction, "but I'll need to verify your identity before you can board." For security reasons, he nodded slowly. He understood protocols. He'd built systems based on them. "Of course," he said. "I have my ID." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a slim black wallet. From it, he took his driver's license and handed it over. She studied it carefully. The name matched the corporate account. The photo matched the man in front of her. But something still didn't sit right with her. Maybe it was the clothes. Maybe it was the lack of luggage or the fact that he wasn't accompanied by anyone. Or maybe it was something deeper, something she wasn't even aware of herself. In her mind, people who chartered Gulfstreams didn't show up looking like they'd just left a college lecture. "I'll need to confirm this with the captain," she said, stepping slightly to the side but still blocking the stairs. "Please wait here," he didn't argue. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching as she walked a few paces away and pressed a button on her headset. Her voice dropped to a murmur, but he caught a few words. "Doesn't match the profile. Hoodie and jeans. Says he's the charterer." A small knot formed in his stomach. Not anger, not yet. More like disappointment. He'd been here before in different forms. Years ago, before the money, before the success, he'd been followed in stores, questioned by security in buildings he was supposed to be speaking in, mistaken for staff at his own events. He'd hoped that success would be a shield, but sometimes it felt more like a disguise that didn't quite fit. Behind him, a black SUV pulled up to the tarmac. Two men in suits stepped out, carrying briefcases. They were executives from his own company, senior VPs flying out for the same meeting. They spotted him standing by the stairs and gave friendly nods. "Hey, you made it," one called out, clapping him on the shoulder as they passed. He smiled faintly. "Just waiting for clearance," he said dryly. They chuckled, assuming it was a joke, and walked right past the flight attendant without a second glance. She didn't stop them, didn't ask for their IDs. They looked the part, suits, ties, polished shoes, so they were allowed to board without question. He watched them disappear up the stairs, the jet's door closing behind them. Now he was alone again with the flight attendant, who was still on the radio, her expression growing more tense. He could see the internal debate playing out on her face. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm right? 2 minutes, that's how long it took. 2 minutes of standing in the sun, feeling the weight of assumptions pressing down on him, while the plane waited and the clock ticked toward departure. Then, a man in a dark polo shirt and khakis came sprinting across the tarmac, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. It was the operations manager, the one who'd handled the booking. He'd just gotten off a call with the charter broker who'd confirmed, in no uncertain terms, exactly who was standing at the bottom of the air stair. "Oh my God," the manager gasped, skidding to a stop. "Sir, I am so sorry. We had a miscommunication. Please come aboard immediately." The flight attendant froze, her clipboard lowering slowly. Her eyes widened as she connected the dots. The name, the company, the quiet dignity of the man she'd just questioned. The realization hit her like a wave, cold, sudden, and heavy, but he didn't say anything. Not yet. He just gave the operations manager a single nod, hoisted his duffel bag back onto his shoulder, and walked up the stairs without looking back. Inside the cabin, the air was cool and quiet. The two executives were already settled, sipping coffee and reviewing documents. They looked up as he entered. "Everything okay?" one asked. "Yeah," he said, sliding into his usual seat by the window. Just a little delay. He buckled his seatbelt, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes. The engines began to whine as the plane prepared for taxi. Outside, through the window, he saw the flight attendant standing alone on the tarmac, staring at the ground, her shoulders slumped. He didn't feel joy. He didn't feel vindicated. He just felt tired, because this wasn't really about one flight attendant. It was about a pattern, a quiet, persistent current that flowed beneath even the most polished surfaces of success. And as the Gulfstream rolled down the runway, lifting into the sky, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The moment he stepped inside the cabin, the cool, hushed air wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. The Gulfstream's interior was exactly as he remembered. Soft cream leather seats, warm wood trim, ambient lighting that glowed like candlelight. It was a space designed for calm, for focus, for distance. But right now, it felt like the eye of a storm that hadn't fully passed. He settled into his seat near the front, the one he always chose, the window seat on the left, just behind the cockpit. From here, he could watch the ground fall away without being disturbed. He didn't look back at the air stair, but he could still feel the weight of what had just happened. Not anger, not yet. More like a dull ache, the kind that comes from being seen but not really seen. The two executives from his company were already deep in conversation, laptops open, coffee cups steaming. They'd flown with him enough times to know his moods. When he was quiet, they left him alone. They assumed the delay had been a scheduling hiccup or a last-minute FAA hold. They had no idea he'd just been treated like a trespasser on his own aircraft. Outside, the engines spooled up with a low, powerful hum. The plane began to taxi slowly toward the runway. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of the tarmac one last time. The flight attendant was still standing there, now joined by the operations manager. They were talking quickly, heads close together. She kept shaking her head, her hands moving like she was trying to explain something that made no sense even to her. The manager kept glancing toward the plane, his face tight with worry. He turned away. The truth was he'd been in situations like this before, just not at this level. Back when he was building his first startup, he'd walked into investor meetings in hoodies and been asked if he was the intern. Once, at a tech conference in San Francisco, security had stopped him 3 times before he reached the stage where he was supposed to give a keynote. Each time he'd shown his badge, smiled politely, and moved on. He'd told himself it was just part of the game, that if he kept winning, eventually people would stop making assumptions. But today felt different, because this wasn't a public space. This wasn't a crowded conference hall or a busy office lobby. This was private, exclusive, a world where money was supposed to erase all doubt. And yet here he was, worth billions, chartering a $70 million jet, and still being judged by the cut of his jeans. The plane lifted off smoothly, climbing into the late afternoon sky. New Jersey shrank below, turning into a patchwork of green and gray. He leaned his head against the window, watching clouds drift past. His mind wasn't on the board meeting ahead. It was on the look in that young woman's eyes, the polite skepticism, the quiet certainty that someone who looked like him couldn't possibly belong here. He didn't blame her, not entirely. He knew how the world worked. He'd studied human behavior for years, built algorithms that predicted it. Bias wasn't always loud or hateful. Sometimes it was just a flicker, a split-second assumption based on clothes, skin, posture. And in high-stakes environments like private aviation, where security was tight and reputations were everything, those flickers could harden into action still. It stung because he hadn't asked for special treatment. He hadn't demanded a red carpet or a personal greeting. He just wanted to board his plane like anyone else. But anyone else didn't include people who looked like him. Unless they dressed the part, acted the part, performed the part perfectly. The lead flight attendant, different from the one on the tarmac, entered the cabin with a warm smile. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes and a calm presence. She'd flown with him before. She knew his preferences: sparkling water with lime, no peanuts, allergy, and a light blanket if the cabin got too cool. "Good to see you again," she said softly, placing a chilled bottle on the tray table in front of him. "Rough start?" He looked up, surprised. "You heard?" She nodded slightly, glancing toward the cockpit. The captain got a call from operations. Said there was a mix-up. He didn't respond right away. He just unscrewed the cap and took a slow sip. The water was crisp, cold, grounding. It wasn't a mix-up, he said finally, his voice low. It was a mistake. A human one. She didn't argue. She just gave a small, understanding nod. "People see what they expect to see," she said gently. "Sometimes they forget to look deeper." Her words hung in the air between them. Simple, true, and painfully familiar. He thought about his early days. Sleeping on a friend's couch, coding until sunrise, eating dollar slices just to save money for server costs. Back then, he'd dreamed of a day when he'd never have to prove himself again, when his work would speak for itself. But success hadn't erased the need to prove. It had just changed the stage. Now, instead of proving he belonged in a garage, he was proving he belonged in a Gulfstream. The flight attendant lingered for a moment, as if sensing he needed to talk. But he didn't, not yet. He just thanked her quietly and turned back to the window. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, the two executives began reviewing talking points for the board meeting. They were nervous. This IPO was a big deal. Billions were on the line, but he barely heard them. His mind kept circling back to the tarmac, to those 2 minutes that had felt like an eternity. He pulled out his phone. No messages from the charter company. No apology. Just silence. That told him everything he needed to know. They were hoping it would blow over, that he'd forget, that it wasn't a big deal. But it was. Because if it happened to him, with all his resources, his name, his power, what happened to people who didn't have any of that? People who couldn't charter a private jet to prove a point? People who got turned away from jobs, apartments, even hospitals, just because they didn't fit someone's idea of who should be there? He'd built his company on the idea that technology could make the world fairer, more transparent, more accessible. But fairness didn't live in code. It lived in people, in choices, in moments like the one that had just passed. He opened his email and typed a quick note to his head of communications. Call the charter company. Ask for their head of client relations. Tell them I need to speak with them before we land. Then he put the phone away and closed his eyes. He wasn't going to make a scene. He wasn't going to demand the flight attendant be fired. That wasn't justice, that was revenge. And revenge didn't change systems. It just burned them down. What he wanted was accountability, clarity, a chance to turn this moment into something that mattered. An hour into the flight, the lead flight attendant returned with a fruit platter, sliced apples, grapes, a few strawberries. She set it down gently. She's new, she said quietly, not looking at him directly. Started last week. Came from commercial aviation. She's good at her job, attentive, professional. But private charters, it's a different world. The expectations are higher. The clients are particular, he nodded. I get that. She didn't mean any harm, the woman continued, her voice soft but firm. But she also didn't stop to consider that maybe the person in front of her was exactly who he said he was. He looked at her then. Do you think she would have questioned a white man in a hoodie? The flight attendant didn't flinch. She just held his gaze for a long moment before answering. Probably not. That was all he needed to hear. He picked up a grape and popped it into his mouth. Sweet, juicy, normal. Everything should have been normal. But it wasn't. Because in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who'd ever been told with words or with silence that they didn't belong, that their presence was suspicious, that their success must be a mistake. And if he had the power to change that, even a little, he had to try. He leaned back in his seat, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, painting the clouds in streaks of orange and pink. The plane hummed steadily beneath him, carrying him west, toward a meeting, toward decisions, toward a future. But first he had a call to make. When the satellite phone rang in the charter company's headquarters in Dallas, it was after hours. The client relations director was just packing up his briefcase when his assistant rushed in, wide-eyed. It's him, she whispered, on the line. He wants to talk now. The director's stomach dropped. He knew exactly who him was. He'd already gotten the frantic call from Teterboro. He'd seen the photos, security footage of the man in the hoodie standing calmly while being blocked from his own jet. He took a deep breath, smoothed his tie, and picked up the phone. Sir, he said, voice steady but respectful. Thank you for calling. I want to personally apologize for what happened today. It was unacceptable. On the other end, there was a pause, just a few seconds, but it felt like forever. I don't want an apology, came the calm reply. I want to understand how it happened, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again, to me or to anyone else. The director exhaled slowly. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. I'll do whatever it takes, he said. Good, the voice on the other end replied, because this isn't just about one flight. It's about who gets to fly and who gets questioned just for showing up. The call lasted 20 minutes. By the end, they'd agreed on a meeting the following week. Not to smooth things over, but to rebuild trust, to create new protocols, to train staff not just in security but in humanity. When the call ended, the man on the plane didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired, but also clear, because sometimes karma isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about creating a space where people can learn, grow, and do better. And that, he thought as the cabin lights dimmed for the night, was worth every uncomfortable minute on the tarmac. The flight landed in Van Nuys just after sunset. The California air was warm and dry, scented with eucalyptus and distant traffic. As the Gulfstream taxied to its private hangar, the cabin lights brightened slightly, signaling the end of the journey. The two executives gathered their things, already rehearsing their talking points for the morning board meeting. One of them glanced over. "You good?" he asked, noticing the quiet intensity in the other man's expression. "Yeah," came the reply. "Just thinking." He didn't say what about. He didn't need to. Some things didn't need explaining, they just needed handling. The air stair lowered with a soft hydraulic hiss. Outside, a sleek black SUV waited, driver standing by the open door. No fanfare, no crowd. Just another arrival in a city that saw billionaires come and go like passing clouds. He stepped onto the tarmac, duffel bag in hand, and paused for just a second. The sky was clear, stars beginning to prick through the deep blue. He took a slow breath. The tension from the earlier incident hadn't vanished. It had settled like sediment in still water. But it was there, and it needed to be dealt with. The drive to his hotel was quiet. He stared out the window as the city lights blurred past. Strip malls, palm trees, billboards glowing in the dark. His mind wasn't on the IPO, the investors, or even the boardroom drama waiting for him tomorrow. It was on the look in that young woman's eyes. Not cruel, not angry, just certain that someone who looked like him, dressed like him, couldn't possibly be the person who'd paid for that jet. That certainty was the real problem. Not her, not even the company. It was the quiet, unchallenged belief that some people don't belong in certain spaces, unless they perform wealth in a very specific way. He checked into the hotel under his company name, as always. The front desk staff recognized him from past stays and greeted him warmly. No questions, no hesitation, just professionalism. It was a small comfort, but it reminded him that not every interaction had to be a test. His suite was spacious, floor-to-ceiling windows, a king bed, a living area with a desk. He dropped his bag by the door and walked straight to the minibar, pulling out a bottle of water. He didn't feel like eating, didn't feel like unpacking. He just stood by the window, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline, glittering like scattered diamonds. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his head of communications. Charter company sent a formal apology email. Also, they've placed the flight attendant on administrative leave pending review. He read it twice, then set the phone down without replying. Administrative leave. That sounded serious. But was it fair? He hadn't asked for her to be punished. He'd asked for understanding, for change. And now she was being sidelined, maybe losing income, maybe fearing for her job. All because she made a mistake rooted in something much bigger than her. That wasn't justice. That was panic. He picked up the phone again and typed a quick reply. "Tell them I don't want her fired. I want her trained. And I want to be part of the solution, not the reason she loses her livelihood." He hit send and leaned back against the window frame. He remembered his first job out of college, working customer service for a tech startup. One day he'd accidentally charged a customer double. He'd been terrified, thought he'd get fired. Instead, his manager sat him down, walked him through what went wrong, and had him call the customer to fix it. That moment taught him more about accountability than any lecture ever could. People make mistakes, especially when they're new, especially when they're working in high-pressure environments where one error can cost a company millions. But the response to that mistake, that's what defines a company's character. He walked over to the desk and opened his laptop. While the board meeting prep documents loaded, he pulled up the charter company's website, scrolled through their About Us page. Their mission statement talked about excellence, discretion, and personalized service. Nothing about inclusion. Nothing about unconscious bias. Nothing about the fact that their clients come in all shapes, colors, and styles. That was the gap. It wasn't that they were malicious. It was that they hadn't even considered this possibility. In their world, private jet clients looked a certain way. Suits, watches, polished shoes. They'd built their entire service model around that image. And when someone didn't fit it, the system broke. He opened a new document and started typing. Not an angry letter. Not a legal threat. Just a clear, honest account of what happened and what could be done differently. He wrote about the 2 minutes on the tarmac. The way he was made to stand aside while others boarded without question. The photo someone took, probably shared in a group chat with a snide comment. The quiet humiliation of having to prove you belong in a space you paid for. But he also wrote about the opportunity. He proposed a partnership. His foundation would work with a charter company to develop a training program focused on bias awareness, cultural competence, and inclusive service standards, not as punishment but as progress. He'd even fund the pilot program himself. Because if he didn't use his position to open doors for others, what was the point of having walked through so many himself? He finished the draft, read it over, and saved it. He'd send it in the morning, for now he needed to rest. Tomorrow was going to be long, but sleep didn't come easily. Around midnight he gave up and walked to the balcony. The city hummed below. Cars, distant sirens, the occasional laugh from a late-night patio. He thought about the flight attendant. Was she home now? Was she crying? Was she angry? Was she realizing for the first time how her assumptions had hurt someone? He hoped so. Not because he wanted her to suffer, but because real change starts with awareness. Back inside, he poured a glass of water and sat on the edge of the bed. His phone lit up again. This time, it was a personal message. From a mentor, an older entrepreneur who'd faced similar battles decades ago. Heard what happened? You handled it with grace. But don't let them off easy. Use this. Turn pain into policy. He smiled faintly. That was the thing about people who'd been through it. They knew the score. They knew that moments like this weren't just personal slights. They were inflection points. The next morning he woke early, showered, dressed in a dark sweater and slacks. Still not a suit, but professional enough for a boardroom. He reviewed his notes for the meeting, but his mind kept drifting back to the training proposal. At 8 a.m., he called his communications lead. Send the draft to the charter company, he said, but add this. I'd like to meet with their leadership team and the flight attendant herself, if she's willing. Not to reprimand, to listen, to learn together. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure? That's unusually generous. Generosity isn't the point, he replied. Clarity is. If we don't talk to each other, we'll keep repeating the same mistakes. By mid-morning, the board meeting was underway. Investors were excited, nervous, pushing for aggressive timelines. He answered their questions calmly, confidently. But part of him was already elsewhere, already thinking about how to turn a moment of exclusion into a moment of connection. Later that day, as he walked back to his hotel through the warm California sun, his phone buzzed again. This time it was the charter company's client relations director. We received your proposal, the man said, voice thick with emotion. And thank you, honestly. Most people in your position would have just walked away or sued. But you're offering us a chance to do better. I'm not doing it for you, came the quiet reply. I'm doing it for the next person who shows up in a hoodie and gets treated like a threat. They agreed to meet the following week at the company's headquarters in Dallas. The flight attendant would be invited, voluntarily, no pressure. That night he didn't go to the fancy dinner the investors had planned. He ordered room service, a simple pasta dish, and sat by the window again watching the city lights. He thought about all the times he'd stayed silent in the past, all the times he'd told himself, it's not worth the fight, but this time felt different. Maybe because he finally had the platform to make the fight better, or maybe because he was tired of being the exception. He wanted a world where no one had to prove they belonged, where success wasn't measured by how well you dressed the part, but by the value you brought to the table. And if that started with one uncomfortable conversation on a tarmac, then so be it. As he turned off the lights and climbed into bed, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: purpose. Not the kind that comes from building a company or making money, but the kind that comes from using your voice to make space for others. The next morning, before his flight back east, he sent one more message to his foundation's program director. Let's develop that training module. Start with private aviation, but design it so it can scale to hotels, luxury retail, even healthcare. The goal isn't to shame people. It's to help them see beyond their blind spots. Then he packed his duffel bag, checked out of the hotel, and headed back to the airport. This time he wore the same hoodie, not as a statement, just because it was comfortable, and if anyone questioned him again, he'd be ready. Not with anger, but with an invitation. Because real change doesn't happen in courtrooms or boardrooms alone. It happens in moments of humility. In conversations that are hard but necessary. In the quiet decision to believe that people can grow, if given the chance. And as the car pulled onto the freeway toward Van Nuys, he knew one thing for sure. Those 2 minutes on the tarmac hadn't been the end of his story. They'd been the beginning of someone else's. The charter company's headquarters in Dallas wasn't what most people pictured when they thought of private aviation. No gleaming glass tower or futuristic lobby. Just a modest 2-story building tucked into a quiet business park, surrounded by live oaks and well-kept lawns. Inside, the walls were lined with photos of jets, smiling crews, and handwritten thank you notes from clients. It felt more like a family-run operation than a high-stakes service for the ultra-wealthy, and in many ways it was. The founder had started with one plane and a dream, and now, 2 decades later, they managed a fleet of 8. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, alone again, wearing the same kind of simple outfit, dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, clean sneakers, no entourage, no security, just him and a leather portfolio holding the training proposal he'd refined over the past week. The receptionist recognized him immediately from the security footage and stood up straighter, her smile warm but nervous. "Mr. Thorne," she said, using the name from his company account. "They're expecting you in the conference room." He nodded. "Thank you." As he walked down the hall, he noticed the subtle tension in the air. Staff glancing up from desks, then quickly looking away. Whispers hushed as he passed. He didn't blame them. He knew how this looked. The billionaire returning to the scene, possibly to deliver judgment. But that wasn't why he was here. The conference room was bright, with a long wooden table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, where 2 of their jets sat idle. At the far end sat the client relations director, the operations manager from Teterboro, and the company's CEO, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and steady eyes. She stood as he entered. "Thank you for coming," she said, extending her hand. "We've been looking forward to this conversation." He shook it. "I appreciate you making the time." They sat. Coffee was served. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was respectful, heavy with unspoken things. Then the CEO leaned forward. "Before we begin, I want to say something clearly. What happened was unacceptable. Not because you're a high-profile client, but because every person who steps onto our aircraft deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing. We failed that standard, and we own it." He nodded slowly. "I believe you mean that. But ownership isn't just words. It's action. We know," she said, "and we're ready to act." She turned to the operations manager, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Go ahead." He cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the footage, spoken with the crew, and we've also spoken with her." The flight attendant. "She's devastated. Not because she's in trouble, but because she realizes now how her assumptions caused real harm. She asked to be here today, but we told her it was your call." He didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the jets gleaming under the Texas sun. Then he turned back. "Is she willing to talk honestly? Not because she's scared, but because she wants to understand?" "Yes," the CEO said. "She's been asking questions about bias, about privilege, about how to do better. She's enrolled in an online course on cultural humility on her own time." That surprised him. Not the enrollment. That was common after incidents like this, but the sincerity behind it. Too often people went through the motions to save their jobs. But this sounded different. "Okay," he said. "Let's bring her in." A few minutes later, she walked in. She looked younger than he remembered, pale, nervous. Her uniform was crisp, but her hands trembled slightly as she held a notebook. She didn't make eye contact at first, just stood near the door waiting. "Please sit," he said gently. She did, choosing a chair far from the head of the table, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. No one spoke for a long moment. Then he broke the silence. "I'm not here to shame you," he said. "I'm here because I believe people can change. And I think you want to." She looked up then, eyes glistening. "I do," she whispered. I didn't even realize I was doing it. I just saw a man in a hoodie alone, no luggage, and my brain filled in the rest. I thought I was being careful. Professional, but I wasn't. I was being biased." Her voice cracked. And I'm so sorry. He didn't say it's okay because it wasn't, not yet. But he nodded. Tell me, he asked, what did you think I was? She swallowed. I thought, maybe you were a friend of one of the passengers who snuck onto the tarmac, or someone trying to get a photo. I've seen it happen before, people climbing fences, pretending to be staff. So I assumed. You assumed I didn't belong, he finished. Yes. And if I'd been white? Same clothes, same bag, same everything, would you have stopped me? She didn't hesitate. Probably not. That honesty earned her a small measure of respect. So many people would have deflected, made excuses, but she faced it head on. Why do you think that is? He asked. She thought for a moment. Because, in my mind, wealth looks a certain way. Polished, put together, and I've never seen a black man on a private jet unless he was in a suit or surrounded by people. So when you showed up alone in casual clothes, my brain didn't connect the dots. It just saw a risk. He leaned back. And that's the problem. Not you personally, but the system that taught you to see risk where there was none. That taught you to associate blackness with suspicion, even in spaces of extreme privilege. She nodded, tears spilling over. I never thought about it like that. But you're right, the CEO spoke up then. We've been reviewing all our training materials. They talk about security protocols, client confidentiality, emergency procedures, but nothing about unconscious bias. Nothing about serving a diverse clientele with true respect. That ends now. He looked at the proposal in front of him. That's why I'm here. Not to cancel you. To collaborate, he slid the document across the table. My foundation has worked with hospitals, schools, even police departments on bias training. We don't do shame-based programs. We focus on awareness, empathy, and practical tools. I'd like to adapt that for your team. Role-playing scenarios, real conversations, not just a one-hour webinar that everyone clicks through. The client relations director flipped through the pages. This is incredibly thorough. And you'd fund it? Yes, for the first year. After that, if it works, you can keep it going. The flight attendant looked up, hopeful. Could I help design it? I know what went wrong from the inside. Maybe I can help make sure it doesn't happen again. He smiled, just slightly. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The rest of the meeting flowed differently after that. Less like a reckoning, more like a planning session. They talked about onboarding new staff, updating the client manifest process to include photos with permission, creating a welcome protocol that focuses on presence, not appearance. They discussed how to handle mistakes, not with punishment, but with coaching. Before he left, the flight attendant asked if she could speak to him alone for a minute. In the hallway, away from the others, she took a deep breath. I know I can't undo what happened, she said, but I want to earn back your trust, not as a client, but as a person. He looked at her, really looked, saw the fear, the regret, but also the determination. Trust isn't given back, he said. It's built, one action at a time. Start with your next passenger. See them, really see them. Not what you expect them to be, but who they are. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I will. As he walked out to the car, waiting to take him to the airport, the Texas sun warm on his face, he felt something shift inside him. Not closure, because this wasn't over, but clarity. This wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was about an entire industry that operated in a bubble of assumed norms. And if he could help pop that bubble even a little, it would be worth it. On the flight home, he opened his laptop and sent an email to 3 other private aviation companies he'd worked with over the years. Not to complain. To invite. We're piloting a new training program on inclusive service. Would you be open to joining us? Within hours, 2 replied. Yes, we've had similar incidents. We're ready to learn. The third didn't respond. But that was okay. Change never happens all at once. Back in New York, he called his foundation's team. Let's move fast on this. Get the curriculum ready. Pilot it with this company first, then scale. One of his team members asked, Do you think it'll make a difference? He thought about the young woman in Dallas, her honesty, her willingness to face her mistake. Yes, he said, because real change doesn't start with perfect people. It starts with people who are willing to be imperfect and still try to do better. That night he didn't watch the news or check stock prices. He sat on his balcony sipping tea, watching the city lights flicker to life. He thought about all the times he'd been told to let it go, to not make a scene, to be grateful for how far he'd come. But gratitude didn't mean silence. Success didn't mean forgetting where you came from or who still gets left behind. Those 2 minutes on the tarmac had been painful, but they'd also been a gift. A reminder that even at the highest levels, the fight for dignity isn't over. It just changes shape. And if he could use his position to make that fight a little easier for the next person, then every second of that wait had been worth it, because karma isn't about getting even. It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to wait at all. 3 months passed like pages turning in a quiet book, steady, purposeful, full of small changes that added up to something real. The training program wasn't rolled out with fanfare or press releases. There were no headlines, no viral videos, just classrooms in Dallas, then Denver, then Miami, where flight crews sat together under soft lights, not in uniforms but in casual clothes, as if to remind themselves that everyone walks in with assumptions. The sessions weren't lectures. They were conversations. A facilitator would pose a scenario. A passenger arrives alone, wearing streetwear, carrying only a backpack. They say they chartered the jet. What do you do? At first, the answers were cautious. Verify ID, call the captain, check the manifest. But then came the harder questions. Why did you assume they might not belong? What did their appearance trigger in you? Have you ever been judged by how you looked? Silence would follow. Then slowly, stories would emerge. One veteran flight attendant shared how early in her career, she'd been mistaken for cleaning staff at a 5-star hotel because of her accent. Another crew member, a young man from rural Ohio, admitted he'd never worked with a black client before joining private aviation, and that his only references came from movies, where wealth and race rarely overlapped. There was no shame in the room, only honesty, and in that honesty, something began to shift. He visited the first training session in person, not as a client, but as a participant. He sat in the back listening more than speaking. When it was his turn, he didn't talk about the incident. Instead, he told them about his grandmother, how she worked as a maid in luxury homes, always treated with polite distance, never invited to sit at the table, even when she'd cooked the meal. She taught me that dignity isn't given, he said quietly. It's claimed. And sometimes you have to claim it over and over again, just to be seen. After the session, several crew members came up to thank him, not for his money, but for his truth. Back home, his foundation worked tirelessly to refine the curriculum. They partnered with psychologists, diversity experts, and even former service workers to build modules that were practical, not preachy. Role-playing became a core part. One person would play a passenger who didn't look the part, another the crew member. They'd switch roles halfway through. The goal wasn't to catch people failing. It was to help them feel the weight of being misjudged. Within 6 weeks, the charter company reported a 70% drop in client complaints related to unwelcoming service. More importantly, their internal surveys showed a dramatic increase in crew confidence when handling ambiguous situations. Instead of defaulting to suspicion, they learned to lead with curiosity. Welcome aboard. Can I help you find your seat? Instead of, are you supposed to be here? But the real test came sooner than anyone expected. One rainy afternoon in Chicago, a woman arrived at a private terminal wearing a hoodie, ripped jeans, and carrying a guitar case. She was a Grammy-nominated musician, black in her 30s, known for her raw, soulful lyrics and refusal to conform to industry glamour. She'd chartered a jet to fly to a surprise performance in Nashville. The ground handler, a new hire who'd just completed the updated training, greeted her with a warm smile. Ms. Reynolds, your Gulfstream is ready. Would you like help with your case? She blinked, surprised. You know who I am? I recognized you from the photo your team sent with the booking, he said. Also, I'm a fan. She laughed, relief washing over her face. Honestly, I was bracing myself. Last time I flew private, I got asked if I was lost. He nodded. We're learning. She boarded without a single question, without a moment of doubt. And later, she posted a quiet thank you on social media, not naming the company, but saying, "Today someone saw me before they saw my clothes. That's all I've ever wanted." The post went modestly viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. People shared their own stories, of being turned away from hotels, questioned in luxury stores, followed in airports. The thread became a quiet anthem for the invisible labor of belonging. He saw the post, didn't comment, but he sent a message to the charter company. This is why we do it. Meanwhile, the ripple effects spread beyond aviation. A luxury hotel chain in New York reached out after hearing about the program. "Our concierge team deals with similar issues," they said. "Can we adapt your training?" A high-end car dealership in Beverly Hills followed. Then a private school admissions office. The foundation began offering scaled versions of the curriculum, always free for the first year, always co-designed with the people who'd lived the experience. But the most unexpected call came from the flight attendant herself. She'd completed the training, not just as a participant but as a co-facilitator. She'd started leading small group discussions, sharing her story with new hires, and now she wanted to do more. "I've been thinking," she said during a video call with his foundation team, "what if we take this into communities? Not just for service workers, but for young people? Teach them early that worth isn't tied to appearance." He joined the call late, listening from his office. "That's a powerful idea," he said. "But why?" She took a breath. "Because I was that kid once. I grew up in a small town where everyone looked like me and acted like me. I didn't know bias existed until I moved to the city and got laughed at for my accent. If someone had taught me back then to question my assumptions, maybe I wouldn't have made that mistake on the tarmac." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Let's build it." And so they did. They launched a pilot program in 3 public high schools, Oakland, Atlanta, and Detroit, called See the Person. It wasn't about guilt. It was about awareness. Students role-played job interviews, retail interactions, airport security lines. They learned to spot microaggressions, to challenge stereotypes, to listen before they judged. One student wrote in a reflection, "I used to think rich people all looked like movie stars. Now I know they look like my math teacher, my barber, my mom who works 2 jobs. Success doesn't have a uniform." That line stuck with him. He printed it and taped it to his office wall. Back at the charter company, things had changed in quieter ways too. The operations manager who'd sprinted across the tarmac that day now opened every new crew orientation with a simple rule. If someone says they belong here, believe them until proven otherwise. And even then, treat them like a human. The CEO made the training mandatory for all 200 employees. She also created a client experience council made up of crew members, clients from diverse backgrounds, and even a representative from his foundation to review policies quarterly. But perhaps the most telling change was this. When he booked his next flight, the confirmation email included a note. "We've updated our welcome protocol. Our team has been trained to recognize you by name, not by appearance. Thank you for helping us grow." He smiled when he read it, not because he needed the thanks, but because it meant the lesson had taken root. One evening, as he walked through a quiet park near his home, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the flight attendant. "We ran our first high school session today." A kid came up afterward and said, "So, I could fly a plane one day even if I don't look like the pilots in the movies." I told him absolutely. "And I'll be the first to welcome you on board." He stopped walking, looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. That was it. That was the point, not punishment, not revenge, not even just fixing one company. It was about opening a door so wide that the next generation wouldn't even have to knock. He typed back, "That's the best kind of karma." And he meant it, because real justice isn't loud. It's the quiet hum of a classroom where a kid dares to dream. It's the calm voice of a crew member saying, "Welcome aboard," without hesitation. It's the moment someone chooses to see a person, not a stereotype. In the months that followed, the program expanded to 10 schools, then 20. Donations poured in, not from corporations, but from individuals who'd read the stories, who'd lived similar moments. A retired teacher sent $50 with a note. "I wish I'd had this when I taught." A rideshare driver contributed his tip money. "Last week, a passenger asked if I stole this car. This is for the next guy." He matched every dollar, but he didn't do it for credit. He did it because he finally understood something. Wealth isn't just about what you have. It's about what you give back and how you use your voice to make space for others to be heard. One afternoon, he received an invitation to speak at a national aviation conference. The organizers wanted him to talk about innovation in private travel. He declined the original topic. Instead, he proposed, "Who gets to fly? Reimagining service in an inclusive world." They accepted. On the day of the talk, the ballroom was packed. CEOs, pilots, flight attendants, regulators. He walked on stage in a simple sweater, no notes, just his truth. He told the story of those 2 minutes on the tarmac, not to shame but to invite. This isn't about one mistake, he said. It's about a system that teaches us to equate worth with appearance. And until we break that link, we'll keep failing the people who don't fit the picture in our heads.